three-headed frogs, or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes. Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together we are about to craft you an hour of unforgettable radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the trees and the bees and the plants and the fish and all those critters all around us, because we are all one part of one big ball of stuff, of living stuff that we like to call planet Earth. So, and we should take care of it. So we got a good show lined up for you today. Rebecca and I are just going to chat with you for a few minutes here, and feel free to jump in at any time by calling 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007.
Ooh, our number has 007 on the end of it. I just realized that.
Yes. Oh, we can't do that too much.
Yeah, we got to stop now.
Yeah, because the copyright thing on YouTube will go, hey.
My roommate has never seen a Bond movie, ever.
Oh, wow.
I can't even conceive that.
How did you manage that?
I don't know.
Yeah, there was a period in my childhood where it was like every Sunday, there'd be at least one James Bond movie.
Yeah.
Oh, well. So you can call us at that number, or you can text at any time during this show at 419-973-5841, and we will read your text on the air, just like it's the 21st century or something. So we're going to chat with you till about quarter after or so, and then we have a very intense interview with Joshua Wright, who is a member of the Rainforest Flying Squad, and that is a group of people up there in British Columbia trying desperately to save the last little bits of old-growth forest on the island from loggers. And after we hear from Joshua, then we'll hear from our advertisers and patrons. Then Rebecca has an interesting little tidbit for us. What were you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be talking about Maumee versus Miami. Know the difference.
Okay, so that's
subtitled "Rebecca embarrasses herself trying to pronounce things."
Right. Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that. Then we have some ecological news, and that's our show. And hopefully, as I said, at some point we'll hear from you at 877-909-1007. And I really, the reason we created this show as a talk show, as a live talk show, is to get feedback from people. And back in the old days when people really knew how to use talk radio, you'd put a show like this on the air and the lines would all be lit up all the time because people liked to get on the air and talk about it. Now,
like on Frasier, I liked that show.
Yeah,
Why can't
Frasier.
we like Frasier? That was fun.
That's right.
I don't know.
Exactly. So think of this as your personal show on Frasier. So you can make a guest appearance just by giving us a call at 877-909-1007. Without that, we have to get our feedback where we can. And I had a nice conversation with a fella I just ran into on the street yesterday. This is one of our first just on the street conversations, and he's listened to the show a couple times, and we had a nice little chat back and forth. One thing though, this fella, despite our best efforts here, he doesn't believe in electric cars, and I had to stop him because we were actually on the sidewalk in front of my driveway, and it was close enough for the van to hear. I didn't want the van to hear this stuff. And I have to admit, electric cars are not perfect.
Might have affected its self-esteem.
That's what it seemed like the miles per gallon were a little bit down today. But they're not perfect. Yes, they need neodymium speaking of pronouncing hard to pronounce things, which is a rare element in their magnets to get the really strong permanent magnets that you get for the electric motors. They also, need lithium, which has to be mined and taken out of the ground and has environmental impacts. But they are much, much better than internal combustion cars. I mean, because every environmental ill you can apply to an electric car, you can apply, there's bigger environmental ills you get from using a gas-powered car. And so somehow people have gotten this notion that, well, if we're going to transition to something from our horrible thing, which is destroying the planet, we immediately have to transition into like the perfect ideal thing. Right. And, that's why they were trying to stop wind turbines, because they say, the blades don't, are causing, once they're used up, you have to put them in the dump, which is like, lots of stuff goes to the dump.
Except there are entire junkyards made up of junked cars that occupy acres.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So, and also since the materials in an electric car, like the neodymium and the lithium, are so valuable, recycling those things, creating 100% recycling system right now at the start of the taking off of this industry is essential. So
lithium, does that come from somewhere in South America?
Actually, there's a lot of places that produce lithium.
A lot of places, okay.
We have lithium. Neodymium, on the other hand, we have a neodymium mine in North America, but like 80 to 90% of it is actually from China.
Wow.
So, so strategically speaking, that's actually a problem for the United States, because we're dependent on China for neodymium. But we still need to make the transition, and since we can't automatically just snap our fingers and have a functioning mass transit system in the United States of America, which I would love.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful.
Which would be great.
It would mean freedom. Yes. Participating in society for me.
And that is one of the good things in the Build Back Better plan, is Biden's going to dump tens of billions of dollars into mass transit. But until we have that in the United States of America, practically speaking, people have to get around. And if you've got to get around, you may as well get around using electrical energy, which is, you only use a quarter of the energy.
Did you hear they just found some mummies in China that they had already found these mummies in, Tarim? No, the Tarim peoples. They were trying to say they were Europeans, but it turns out they're probably most closely related to Native Americans.
Wow. No, I did not hear about that.
Yep.
But
I get the archaeology stories because they know I'm a nerd.
That's cool. But so my point is that, this is a fellow who was listening, and he's like, he likes the show. He really likes the show, partly because we kind of fly in the face of the mainstream media sometimes. Mm-hmm. But it's just a reminder that you can't, I hate to say this, but you can't make the perfect the enemy of the good all the time. Sometimes it really is. Sometimes
right.
You cannot avoid,
They would, in fact, be a vast improvement.
Right.
And then if we had some public transit, too, it would be a super-duper huge improvement.
And so, people could use the lack of perfection as an excuse not to do anything, which that means you're choosing to do the dirty thing. You're choosing to do the least supportive, the least sustainable thing. And don't do that. Do what you can. And that is a point this fellow did say, is he likes to do what he can. He didn't specify what he actually does, but
right.
Part of what he doesn't do is try to drive an electric vehicle. And if you can do it, if you can afford it, right now you absolutely should be doing it. That's weird. My opinion.
Americans love flying so much, and yet now, I feel safer walking to my neighborhood corner store past several gang members rather than going on an airplane with nice middle class people.
Oh,
Allegedly
really?
Nice. Well, you've heard keep attacking flight attendants. It's bad.
Oh,
yeah,
going on. And yeah, okay. Well, hey, we got a text, and as promised, I'm going to read this text. Hey, Joe, I'm a regular listener. Thank you very much, and glad to be able to text. Just wondered if you had any thoughts on the Glasgow Climate Summit. Many indigenous people spoke to leaders to plead for their help, and as you know, the bigger countries are all bailing out. Fossil fuels are winning again. Well, yes, we are going to talk about the Glasgow Summit in the Ecological News segment. In fact, that's the biggest story.
I'm guessing it's probably a profoundly mixed blessing is going to be the punchline. But
yeah.
we'll find out in a minute.
Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, we will be talking about COP26. That's our biggest news story in our Eco News segment. So, but part of what went on at COP26 were commitments from a lot of countries to stop deforestation. And Canada was one of those countries that said, we're going to stop deforesting. In the meantime, though, they're very busy deforesting.
They're going to stop. Probably when the trees are gone.
Yeah, once all the trees are gone,
then they'll stop.
No more cutting. That's kind of what happened to the New York State Adirondack Park. Is they cut down the entire northern section of New York State, cut down all the trees for charcoal to burn in New York City. And then once the trees were gone, they created a preserve where they forbid tree cutting and charcoal making. But
it's a little bit like my one friend who used to say, whenever I stop drinking, I leave a beer close at hand in case I wake up and need something to drink. So when he said I stopped drinking, he means I passed out.
Yeah, I went to sleep.
Yeah.
Right. But on the third hand, 100 years later, that protected preserve is beautiful, deep, thick forest. So
good. So that was at least something good came out of it. Yeah.
But what's happening right now in British Columbia is there's just 2%, less than 3% of the old growth forest left on British Columbia. And the scientists are telling us we're learning new ways every single day where old growth forest is literally the best way to get carbon out of the air. It's just let the trees do what they do.
It's kind of what it's for.
They know how to do it. So they're up there fighting for all of us, and they're having a rough time right now because the Oregon government, the National Democratic Party, NDP, keeps saying publicly, we're deferring logging, we're stopping. But these protesters on the front lines blocking the logging roads are saying, no, you're not. we can see the logging. We're being arrested trying to stop the logging that you say is deferred. So it's a good time. It's an important time for us to pay attention to what's going on there, because the mainstream press has a tendency to just listen to what the premier or the party officials will say, and not, dig that one step extra to say, well, is that actually what's going on? So we do that here, though. We dig out and find out what's actually going on, and that's why we called up Joshua Wright for an update. So, Josh, we're set. Go ahead and play that interview, please. Okay, Joshua Wright, thank you so much for coming back to For a Green Future.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Okay, so we talked back in August, I think, and while we've been following you folks from a distance, a lot has happened up there on the Ferry Creek. In a nutshell, could you tell me how it's going up there?
So last month, the injunction that had been in place since April was struck down by Justice Thompson, and then a week later, Teal Jones appealed that decision, and now the RCMP are back, and they are continuing to arrest people. Teal Jones has been able to basically break through all of our blockades, and they're now clear cutting immediately adjacent to Ferry Creek in the habitat of endangered old growth speckled belly lichen. And then in the past couple of days, the government has announced new large-scale old growth deferrals that will potentially impact some of the areas at Ferry Creek. But basically, we're holding out. We're waiting until these forests are actually protected. These deferrals are hopeful development, but they don't go into place for at least another month. And in the meantime, trees are falling, and what we want is an end to all old growth logging. We don't want a 2-year deferral on some of it. We want an end to all old growth logging because we're in a climate crisis, and we need these forests. And that is, that's ultimately what's going to keep us out there over the winter for as long as it takes to protect not only Ferry Creek, but all old growth forests across the province.
Right. Now, if you Google this story and you search for it, they keep saying deferral. But pretty much isn't deferral just saying we're going to save this bit for last, we're going to cut other stuff first? It's not really a long-term protection.
Yeah, absolutely. People are operating under the conception that by deferring logging, you're actually preventing logging. But in fact, you're just displacing logging. Because right now they're deferring approximately half of what they've termed at-risk old-growth forests. Like, that's what they're offering to defer. They haven't deferred them yet. In fact, they're deferring the notion of doing a deferral to defer the decision to actually protect these areas. So it's a bit of a ridiculous game here. But essentially what's going to happen is that they're going to defer some of these areas. You know, there are cut blocks up in the area that we're concerned about that will be impacted with this deferral. But what's going to happen is that logging is going to be displaced onto other areas. And we don't need a conversation about deferrals. We need a deferral to have a conversation about protecting forests. So we need to defer the old growth, all of it, and then we need to have a conversation about, okay, how can we make it economically feasible to end this for good? But in the meantime, we can't be logging the old growth. We can't be talking about temporarily deferring the logging while they're logging in an attempt to stop the logging. You know, that's ridiculous.
Right. And it seems like talking about the deferral is actually an attempt to stop you folks as opposed to stopping logging.
The government definitely wants us gone. We're on their side, but they need to face the fact that BC is stuck in the Stone Age when it comes to logging. You know, most civilized countries have stopped logging old growth. Actually, BC is one of the only places that still allows large-scale old growth clear cutting. The U.S. still does to an extent, but nothing compared to the extent of what's happening in BC. There's 50,000 hectares of old growth cut every year in British Columbia. And, you know, you think about deforestation and, you know, the West likes to point a lot of fingers at Brazil and the Congo for logging forests. And in the meantime, there is a deforestation happening in our own backyards in Canada. And people are starting to realize that, and people are starting to stand up and resist, because the status quo will mean the destruction of an entire rainforest, essentially an entire ecosystem. Because we are talking about the last little bits. We're not talking about much. And everybody at this point, you know, the one thing that this announcement this past couple days has highlighted is the fact that now everybody agrees that we're in a crisis, and now it's a matter of treating it like a crisis rather than treating it like an economic situation where you're pandering to the logging companies rather than to the realities of the situation.
Yeah, I think a point that's not really being made enough is that logging will end in a few years, either because it's been stopped by the province or because there won't be any more old growth left. I mean, you're that close to running out.
Yeah, I mean, the government is at COP26 right now, and they are making promises to end deforestation in Canada by 2030. But that's 9 years away, and in 9 years, that is another 500,000 hectares of old growth gone, and that will certainly mean most, if not all, of the best stuff will have been cut by then. And, you know, BC emits something like 60 million metric tons of CO2 annually from fossil fuels, and meanwhile, the forestry sector emits the same amount from simply logging of these forests, especially old growth forests. These forests contain around Fairy Creek, they contain 1,300 metric tons of carbon dioxide per hectare, and almost all of that is lost when you log an area like this. So it's anachronistic to say, okay, we're going to, you know, change the way we're doing things and you know, create a sustainable economy. When, meanwhile, you're logging your very best carbon sink, like one of the best carbon sinks in the entire world. And this is a pattern we've seen over and over from the Oregon government. You know, they promised not to build Site C Dam, they promised to oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline, they promised to protect old growth, and, you know, they were elected in 2017, and only now are they even making the first real step in the direction of actually protecting any old growth. And this is only because they've been dragged kicking and screaming by over 1,000 people who've gotten arrested at Fairy Creek. And even now, their actions are still insufficient. So it's like, it's kind of relieving to see that the dam is finally broken and that we're finally getting, you know, serious action from the government. But it's action that should have been taken years ago. And in lieu of that action being taken years ago, they need to be taking much more bold action now. And this is not that.
You know, we rejoiced when we heard about the decision to remove the injunction, to lift the injunction, but then, as you mentioned, a week later, it was put back into place.
We rejoiced too for a minute.
Yeah. Did the lifting? I mean, did you have a noticeable difference in the way the police behaved during that one glorious week, and did you notice a difference once the injunction was put back in place?
So the RCMP are acting as a rogue agency of the government at this point. They are a paramilitary police force that is not accountable to anyone at this point. The Oregon government likes to say, "Oh, wait a minute. What world would it be for politicians to tell the police what they should and shouldn't do?" But think about this: if the courts aren't listening, if the RCMP aren't listening to what the courts are telling them to do, and if the Oregon government isn't putting their foot forward and telling the RCMP what they can't be doing, then the RCMP are telling the RCMP what they can do. And right now, all of the, whenever there's a complaint against the RCMP and the politicians and the courts tell, go submit it to the internal complaints review board, and nothing happens because it's the RCMP policing themselves. So when the injunction was lifted, the RCMP basically had to leave to a large extent. So, there was still a presence on the ground, and basically we were able to hold Granite Main, which is the main road into the Ferry Creek. The plans are up to log around Ferry Creek, and we tried expanding into other areas, but when we tried doing that, they started arresting us under the civil code. But it was definitely we took a lot of their teeth away with the injunction being lifted. But they got it put back a couple days later by a different judge. And basically, Teal Jones was arguing that if they didn't have an injunction, they would suffer irreparable harm, which is kind of ironic for a company clear-cutting old growth to say. But now that the RCMP are back, we've seen extremely violent arrests. It's some of the worst incidents that have been in this interim injunction. A protester on their own land, a Pacheedaht protester, was brutalized a couple weeks ago. Somebody was knocked unconscious. It is, exactly what you'd expect from the RCMP when they basically get to do whatever the hell they want, and when they're being ordered to serve the interests of industry rather than interests of the majority of the public, and essentially being asked to remove indigenous protesters from their own land and to make way for a colonial entity to clear-cut their spiritual places. This is straight up colonialism. And the fact that the BC government is now hiding behind Truth and Reconciliation as a reason not to protect these forests is about the most underhanded that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's using colonialism to justify colonialism. What's going on with the weather up there? You guys had an immense storm hit, didn't you? And is the weather going to affect the logging? Since we're coming up into the cold times.
So we're kind of this is it's kind of a miracle that we've stopped this much work from going on this past year, because 6 months straight of an injunction is a lot to resist, and they have gotten through and they have clear cut many of the areas we were protecting. But now in the next few weeks, snows will hopefully be coming, and that'll shut down logging at Ferry Creek at least, and in the adjacent areas to Ferry Creek. But what's going to happen is that the industry is going to move back to the cake use, where those before and after pictures were taken, and I think everybody's seen those huge stumps, whether it's on The Guardian or any of those huge publications that have shared them. They're going to go back there and they're going to log, because that's a lowland area that they can easily get to in the winter, and they're going to start clear cutting there. And that's what we saw last year, and that's what's probably going to happen again.
So how's everyone doing? You mentioned you're at over 1,000 arrests so far. How are people holding up?
I think people are tired. But I don't think anybody has any intention of going anywhere. It's exhausting work. It's also some of the best work you can possibly doing in your entire life. Going out there is about the most meaningful experience. I think everybody is sort of waiting to be able to say, okay, we saved Ferry Creek, and let's move on to the next place, and let's challenge it in another area outside of other nations. I think we're sort of just waiting, hoping, if these deferrals go through, that's going to be a major step. But there's still a 3-kilometer approved logging road and a large land cut block at the end of that logging road, right in the Ferry Creek Rainforest, that won't be impacted by these deferrals. And then the adjacent areas, Bugaboo Creek is still up for logging. Many of the areas that should be protected by these deferrals probably won't be. And I can see us, probably over the winter, things will calm down a little bit. We might get a bit of a break. It really depends on what's going to happen with the injunction decision. And then I think next spring we're going to keep on challenging the status quo of old growth clear cutting, because it is unsustainable and we only have a few years left. And whatever we save now could, be around for the next 500 generations, and what we don't save now won't come back for a really long time, if ever.
So the next injunction decision, that's is that the 25th of November where that's going to be made?
I think it's the 15th that we're going to be in court, and then usually they'll announce the decision, in the next week or so.
All right. Well, good luck. Let's hope sanity reigns for a change there. So, if people want to follow more closely what's going on there, what's the best way for them to keep in touch with you folks?
Well, a good place to go is our social media, so Fairy Creek Blockade on all platforms. And then we also have our website, Last Stand for Forest, where you can donate. And, if you are in British Columbia or thinking about coming out to British Columbia, numbers are low because entering the winter. And we need people out there. Sometimes we've had 3,000 people at camp at one time. Now there's, a few dozen, and we need, those few dozen people are very overworked, and they need some rest and they need some reprieve. And the only way they can get that is if more people come in and fill their shoes. So I would encourage anybody listening to please consider coming out to Fairy Creek, whether you can be arrested or cannot be arrested. There are plenty of roles, cooking, clean, doing all sorts of stuff, or going out and standing in front of chainsaws. So yeah, come out. That's my biggest message.
So if someone were to come out there, they would get to see basically matchless forests, and I'm imagining the stars are pretty bright out there at night. There's not too much artificial light where you are.
Yeah, not at all, unless it's raining.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So, and so you folks are probably seeing all kinds of wildlife, and what sort of things would someone who came to join your camp, what would they see?
They would see some of the most beautiful places in the world, and they would meet some of the best people in the world. That's how I can sum it up. It's life-changing to come out.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Joshua. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
And thank you, folks, for listening. So what do you think about all those protesters out there in British Columbia? Are you for them or are you against them?
Joe.
I'm for them. I really think they're doing the whole world of great service by protecting those last trees. But maybe you disagree. And hey, if you do, give us a call, 877-909-1007. We got a text during the interview. Someone chimed in. Basically, they said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, in quotation marks. So they agree with that sentiment. All right. Well, so now that we've heard from our interviewee, it's time to go on to our advertisers and patrons.
Alrighty.
Hooray! For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to go to their website, which is simply wcparks.org. They have a great app. Go to any app store and search for WC Parks. And of course, they're available on all the social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc., etc. That's the Wood County Park District. And I got to say, I walk Ursula there in one of their parks, the Slippery Elm Trail, almost every day. And the parks are really looking beautiful today. I mean, with the sun, and the trees have finally changed. And because we had some cold, they finally got some color. It's a great day to get out to the park. So that's the Wood County Park District. All right. And we are also brought to you by our patrons. And these are wonderful, brave people who realize that it takes commitment to make change in things. And they have committed to giving us a little bit of a donation every month. They went to patreon.com. That's Patreon. Searched for Green Future. Our page on Patreon popped up, and they picked a monthly level of membership that matches their budget. And we are very, very grateful because we literally couldn't be bringing this show to you without our patrons. So please consider joining them. Please become one of our patrons and earn our everlasting gratitude here on For a Green Future. So that's going to patreon.com. Okay, now it's time to hear from Rebecca. And Rebecca is going to teach us the difference between Maumee and Miami. Okay, go ahead.
There you go. Well, this obviously started as another attempt to remedy what turned out to be some fairly serious confusion and ignorance on my part. But, as a resident of Northwest Ohio, I sort of vaguely knew that we have a bunch of stuff called Maumee and Miami here, which is named after a Native American tribe. And then there's also Miami, Florida. Why? Who would be occupying all that space or moving around between that space? No understand. So, yeah, it turns out that everything in Ohio is named after the Miami, Illinois people who call themselves the Miamiaki. There we go. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, apologies. I'm not smart, but yeah.
Well, and if any Miamiaki are listening and would like to call in with a correction, or please do.
Miamiaki,
Okay,
right?
go ahead.
Yeah. So they're in the Algonquinian language group apparently, and we're native to north central Indiana, southwest Michigan, and western Ohio, and have been mostly at this point located to Oklahoma.
Relocated.
Pretty much.
Forcibly.
Involuntarily, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody. Yeah. So, from this, named after this group, we get the Maumee River, which I think was originally the lesser Miami, the little something. But there were two there's a greater and lesser Miami, a greater and a little Miami in southern Ohio. So maybe that's why we decided to change it to Maumee. I don't know. But, it runs from the confluence of the St. Mary's and St. Joseph's River at Fort Wayne through all the way to Lake Erie, basically empties out in Lake Erie. Okay, here goes another one. In Shawnee, this river was known as the Hotawathiepi River. Mm-hmm. And the actual Miamiaki tribe called it the Ta'awawa Cepewe River. Sorry about that. So, that's what's going on there. Also, we have the Greater Miami River in southern Ohio, which is near Cincy and Dayton. It runs from something called Indian Lake to the Ohio River. The Maumee also connects to the Ohio River into the Mississippi, but there's a portage involved.
You mean the Miami?
No, the Maumee.
Oh, the Maumee. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was part of like a great trading route, Native American trading route that ultimately went all the way from the East Coast down through the Maumee River to the Mississippi and all the way to New Orleans.
Oh, so with a portage, you could get from the Maumee to the Mississippi.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool.
But it doesn't naturally go that way. And it goes, among other things, as we were talking about the Greater Miami River, runs past Miamisburg. There's also a Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Not sure how close those rivers go to that, but if you look at flood information for Oxford, Ohio, you get references to both the Great and Little Miami rivers. And then we have Miami, Florida, the southeast Floridian city of 467,000 people, maybe slightly better known nationally and internationally than Maumee, Ohio. But there's a town called Maumee. But that it turns out is actually named after a people called the Miami, who their language at least has gone extinct. There were like 3 words of Miami recorded, and then their language went extinct. I don't know if they're extinct. Probably a lot of testing would be needed to determine this. And there's a lake and a river called this, as well as the city, and it means big water. So it means the same thing as Michigan, essentially.
Okay.
Because people didn't know that Michigan meant big water, so that's why I was effectively born on the shores of Big Lake. If you break it down,
right.
And they have no linguistic or cultural ties to the Miami, Illinois of the Midwest at all whatsoever. So there we have it.
Right. Except of course they probably descended from the same ancestral stock, the same people that initially came over to North America. So
Okay, aren't they saying that though that like people came from various places now is the latest theory? Like there were some people coming from Asia and some people coming from the other directions.
The picture's getting much more complex.
Yeah.
But
and of course, some Native Americans find that offensive because they're like, well, we've always been here. You know, we just kind of popped out of the earth here.
Well, this is a nice place to start. So I'm saying there
You're
may,
sure as heck year before us, we know this much.
Yeah, follow it way far enough back, and you might find, an ancestral crossover language there. Well, that was very interesting. Now, I was taught, I learned, or I believe that the word for mouse in Anishinaabe, which they're up in Michigan, is Maumee. That's actually.
And then there's this really obviously fake sounding legend, which I thought was fake the first time I heard it, which is that, I don't know, there was some little Indian girl little Native American girl being kidnapped, and she was shouting mommy back to the, and that's how they named it, which sounds like a load of hooey when you hear it, and sure enough is. No, I'm pretty sure that somebody just made that up. It's not in any way real. Why would she be shouting mommy in English for starters?
Yeah, well, I do know, and that the versions of the the native princess getting kidnapped are all over North America. That's like the fake Indian legend that looks like it's like the generic fake Indian legend that gets substituted for any actual Indian legends. It's
kind of like we have a habit of inventing bizarre cuisine and blaming it on innocent foreigners.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks so much for that. That little. I have wondered about Miami and Little Miami and the Miami River, and I actually, way back in my college days, I actually took a week and hiked down the Little Miami River.
Oh, very nice.
And it's really beautiful and very. It was largely untouched. There's no real trails along it or anything. I just did it. So back in those days when I was a little crazier than I am today. All right. So thanks, Rebecca. And on to ecological news. So as we said at the start, our big story in terms of ecology is the COP26 Conference of the Parties, and the 26th Conference of Parties trying to deal with global warming through diplomacy
and releasing a lot of hot air in the process,
and sitting around talking and giving people one nice thing is they do give people a platform to talk about it,
right? But
then the question is, then do they do anything about it? It's kind of like I've been to many public hearings, where people come and they're all prepared. They give facts, they give figures. They say you can't do this because that'll happen, and then the people from the government sit there and nod and say and even write stuff down sometimes.
Right.
But then it never actually affects the policies. So, but some good things did come out of it. Right this time, 100 countries have signed on to an agreement saying no more deforestation by 2030. Which is, 9 years away. And as we heard from Joshua Wright, for some forests, that's way too late.
Yeah.
But at least they have said they're going to stop. 100 countries have said no more deforestation. And it did include Canada and Brazil, two of the biggest deforesters. You do have to think about intent. You do have to think about whether they're being honest or not, because especially in Brazil, the prime minister there is totally committed to cutting down as much rainforest as he can. But maybe they'll change, and they have agreed to stop. So that is something. One interesting note that logged forests account for 11% of the global CO2 emissions, because as we know from studies, that once you cut a forest down, it, instead of absorbing carbon, it emits carbon, because all that stored up carbon that was in the ground and things goes up into the atmosphere for about 20 years. And after about 20 years, then enough plant life has regrown that it becomes a net absorber again. But logged forests produce 11% of the worldwide CO2 emissions right now, so it's not good. China did commit to no new coal plants abroad, they had a policy of financing other countries' coal plants.
Okay.
And even providing them with the companies to do it and the expertise to build them. They have said they're going to stop doing that right away. But they are still planning to build 25 to 50 new coal plants in China. So the world's biggest carbon producer is still planning to produce more carbon, but they're going to prevent other countries from producing carbon. It's like, I'm not going to stop drinking, but you are cut off.
Okay.
So,
yeah, that's great. That's more alcohol for me.
Right.
Yeah.
20 other countries have made a similar agreement in that they've committed to stopping public support for foreign fossil fuel development. So they're not going to invest in carbon in other countries, and that's 20 countries. The three biggest countries, China, India, and U.S., have not agreed to do that. Except China agreed to do it for foreign countries, but not for their own companies. The only thing about this agreement to stop public support for foreign fossil fuels is written in there. It says, except for exceptions. So,
okay.
Yeah, right.
We're not going to do it except for when we feel like it.
Except for what so, not enough, not satisfying. And they also are saying that that they're not going to do it except for exceptions, and the exceptions are allowed if you have carbon sequestration. They're going all in on figuring out technologies to build machines that will suck carbon out of the air. And they're saying, so if you've got one of those machines, you can go ahead and produce carbon, because net you're going to balance it all out. Except, of course, carbon sequestration is an unproven technology. And most of the places in the world where they've tried it, like injecting CO2 back into the ground, it has that nasty habit of popping back up again because they inject it into places like oil fields, which are full of holes because they've been drilled full of holes while people are pumping for oil. So the CO2 carbon sequestration that it's relying on for their exceptions is not reliable at this point. So along with the COP26, with the official thing, there were also massive protests in Glasgow.
Yippers.
In fact, the largest protests ever in Glasgow. 100,000 people came and protested in Glasgow, saying, we want actual agreements with actual teeth and actual penalties if you don't do what you've committed to doing, some kind of enforcement mechanism, because there have been a lot of promises and not nearly enough actual carrying through on those promises.
There's this thing I was listening to public radio about how the protest culture in Portland is becoming increasingly radicalized. Turns out this is related to cops going nuts and beating people up for no reason. Mm-hmm. And then, secondhand, people are getting radicalized because they're noticed that you've either disabled or killed our relative, and the cops aren't doing anything. Well, now we feel a lot more radical,
Yeah, well, this is why violence is just a negative spiral. The more it goes on both sides, the worse the whole situation gets. That's why as a Green, I'm committed to non-violence. And one thing that was pointed out with this 100,000 people strong protest, zero violence. There was no fighting. Everybody was getting treated. There were a couple arrests. One was a group of socialists decided to do a pyrotechnic thing with fireworks, and fireworks in crowds of 100,000 people don't necessarily go well together.
So problem maybe.
So they arrested a couple of those folks. And then there was also a group, 21 arrests from a group that I'd never heard of before. It's called Scientist Rebellion. And these are scientists who've said, it's time for civil disobedience.
We would like to not die. Yes.
Yeah, and they chained themselves across one of the main bridges in Glasgow.
Good for them.
And refused to leave and got arrested. And so it's a radical bunch of scientists. And if you've watched any science fiction movie from the 1950s, it's not good to radicalize scientists, because you don't know what you could end up with,
Secret layers.
Secret layers.
Volcanoes.
Genetically modified, creatures that eat oil derricks, you know.
This is how we get secret lairs, people.
Yeah, so it's not good.
Do you want secret lairs?
I've always kind of wanted one.
I kind of do.
Yeah. Yeah. But so, and also I wanted to report that we had a little protest here in Ohio based on this. There were about 250 protests around the world that were in conjunction with the Glasgow protests.
Right.
Mostly organized through Greta Thunberg's organization, and including in Columbus. So we had a nice, well, it's a little protest. There's 20 plus people there, including a bunch of students who are fighting the natural gas plant that they're building on the OSU campus.
Good for them.
Yeah, that we've reported on that before. And so, you know, so even in Columbus, even in Ohio, some people got out protesting the destruction of the planet, you know. I mean, if you're going to protest anything, it seems like destruction of the planet would be something you'd want to...
That's a biggie.
Yeah, protest.
There's other things, you know. I don't like it when the police murder people, for example.
Oh yeah, there's tons of things you can.
What's going on with abortion law right now? But yeah, destruction of the planet pretty big.
Yeah,
we might not have to worry about all that other stuff pretty soon if we don't stop that.
Yeah, exactly. So there we go. So that's COP26. Some agreements, some progress. One thing that people say who were involved in it is that even though countries like the U.S. and Canada, or U.S. and China and India did not commit to phasing out carbon, they're saying the sense of it is now everybody has realized they've got to phase out carbon at some point, but nobody wanted to make a commitment to do it by a certain date. So I guess that's good that everybody is sort of talking, finally saying, all right, we'll leave it in the ground eventually.
Go ahead and act on that anytime.
Yeah, so the question is, you know, do they drain the keg dry or do they stop while they could still see before they pass out? I don't know. All right, so we'll follow COP with some clear-cut good news.
Okay.
Some nice stuff. Wisconsin, we've reported, of course, before about Wisconsin and the wolf controversy there, how there's people who want to wipe out all the wolves, and they nearly got their wish back in February when they were forced to open up a wolf hunting season, and the hunters just blew past all the limits on the hunt because they had all kinds of weapons and mechanized, computerized stuff, and drones and dogs with radio collars, and just almost, you know, they way over hunted the wolves in that hunting season. A Dane County judge...
I don't think it's right to set the puppies against the danger puppies.
No. A Dane County judge has put an injunction in saying no wolf season this year.
Okay, so they went a little crazy before. Okay.
They were going to have a November wolf season. It was supposed to start on the 6th, but this yesterday, in fact, which means that by today, like a third of the wolves in Wisconsin would now be dead. But they stopped it. So
how is it even fun if you're just sitting there like looking at a screen and pressing buttons and killing wolves? You know, I mean, that's you want to feel all wild and natural and stuff. Well, yeah, how does this accomplish that?
Well, most of them get out in their pickup trucks with their radio controlled dogs, and so
get some fresh air.
So they get out of the pickup truck to shoot the wolf.
Oh, that's good.
You know,
I guess.
even though they're following the chase on their doggy cams, you know, and watching it on their GPS, and it's like, yeah, so.
That's nice that you strapped out of your truck eventually.
Yeah, but when it comes time to actually shoot the wolf, they'll get out and shoot them. All right.
They're not actually drone hunting wolves yet.
Not yet.
Yeah,
not
probably
yet.
that's next.
Not that I know of. Yeah.
Oh, God, I just gave them an idea.
Yes. Okay. All right, so that's some nice information, some good news from Wisconsin. So maybe the wolves will have a chance to recover somewhat here. Next story from Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, the journal. It was published on November 4th by Natalie Guerrero Ramirez, and the title is Functional Forest Restoration Multi-Species Mixes Best for Recovery, Benefits Increased with Age. So what that means is that they've discovered that if you just try to regrow a forest by doing a monocrop, by just putting 1 million of this one tree species in, it doesn't recover nearly as well as if you mimic what was there before,
right?
Which is a mix of different trees, different hardwoods and softwoods, and
what nature actually does.
Yeah, and like some trees down in the boggy areas, and other trees up on the hills, and those that leads to much more rapid recovery. And, it's just another example of science eventually realizing, wow, nature got it right again. Look at that. So it's just worth noting, because a lot of the tree planting schemes that people are promoting as a global warming strategy, fighting global warming, a lot of those involve a lot of this monoculture, and that's not nearly as good. So on to another interesting little story. Seagrass. We've talked about seagrass before, and it's an extremely environmentally beneficial stuff.
You can make very nice baskets out of it too, apparently.
Oh, really? I did not know
Seagrass
that.
basket. Isn't that a thing in North Carolina or something?
I didn't know. Maybe.
I think it is. It's like a traditional craft.
But seagrass, they have what they call pastures of seagrass off the coasts. And apparently seagrass is a plant that was a land plant, but 100 million years ago or so went back into the ocean. So it was initially a land plant.
Like dolphins and things.
Right.
Used
like
to be land.
Same way dolphins.
From the sea to the land and back to the ocean.
Right.
Okay.
Like and dugongs and things like that.
Right.
So
what do they call them? Cetaceans?
Cetaceans, yeah, all those whaley
whales
things.
Whales and dolphins and things, yeah.
So, but for a long time, scientists had no idea how seagrass managed to grow because it needs a lot of nitrogen, and there's not a lot of nitrogen in the ocean. And so they discovered that there is a bacteria called Candidatus celerinatemonas neptuna, which is a nitrogen fixer. And so the same way like clover or beans or critters or plants like that on the earth have beneficial bacteria growing in their roots, turns out seagrass also has a beneficial bacteria growing in its roots that acts pretty much the same way. It fixes the nitrogen and lets the plants grow and puts that nitrogen into the ecosystems. And so seagrass provide all kinds of benefits. Fish can spawn there, and a lot of fish just eat the seagrass. They just graze on it.
Right.
And a lot of it, the success of the seagrass has because of this Candidatus celerinatemonas neptuna, which they just discovered. So we're still finding, basic stuff like that. And so science has a long way to go before they've got everything figured out. All right. Just time for one more text or call and story. Our last story of the day, just an update on something we've talked about before. And that is, I guess you could call this a House Bill 6 update. Although part of me doesn't want to because of the trauma involved. But here it is. This is a good House Bill 6 update. The portion of House Bill 6 that directly took money from us and gave it to the nuclear plants got repealed a while back. But there's still the part where they take money directly from ratepayers and give it to the 2 coal plants, one in Indiana and one in Ohio. Well, there's a Senate bill, and that Senate bill is going through, and it looks like it may actually pass, a Senate bill that repeals that section of House Bill 6. And that's essentially the last big functional part of House Bill 6.
So, okay, so is House Bill 6 really kind of almost gone now?
Yes, if they can get rid of this last section, House Bill 6 will functionally be gone.
See, we fought that crap off. That's what people don't understand is they're like, oh, Ohio, you're so regressive. They don't understand that, we are protecting them from some stuff that could roll over the whole country if we don't stop it.
Yeah, and it looks like, knocking on wood, with the help of an attorney general, we've managed to turn it back. So, that's it. Okay, that's it for this show. Thanks so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Bye-bye.
And I do believe it's time we was done.
kids with leukemia.